19th of December. We are the NHS University of Liverpool. Everybody this morning. I have apologies from Siobhan. Any?
Yes.
Maybe.
Oh, you're best.
Yes. Sorry.
Yes. Excellent.
I was just going to say Chris Maud's in response to that question. Said, is there any more?
Two of them.
Sorry. Yes, she's had a lovely vote. And separately, Chris Maudsley is unable to attend last minute on one of his family's vehicles. This morning.
Okay. No new declarations of interest I've been informed of. We've got our minutes of our last meeting. Whenever I read the minutes, I always say it feels like yesterday, when this virtually is yesterday. When it was only 3 weeks ago that we met. Are there any points of accuracy, clarification?
I just had one about Zoom, which I think I've mentioned to Holly. Actually, he was in attendance at the public board, just not a private one.
Thank you.
Just to update with Daniel around.
Sorry, can people speak? I don't have a hearing problem, but it's quite hard to hear at times in the room.
Okay. Thank you for the prompt.
We just noted Elias's surname incorrectly in the minutes. If you've been on the
Great.
as well.
All right, subject to those corrections, are we content to approve the minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. On the rolling action tracker, Daniel, I think everything's either picked on the agenda or closed.
Yeah, they're all marked as complete, and any updates are provided in the final column. So we're presuming all of them can now be closed.
Thank you. Straight into the Chief Executive Officer report.
Thank you, Chair. So the report just brings together a few of the highlights since we last met, as David said, only 3 weeks ago, and today is a slightly different version of the board meeting, obviously, because we're out of sync with the Christmas break. So there'll be verbal updates from each of the management boards today rather than the usual written updates, but they will follow. So I was just going to pick a few of the things that you might have usually seen in those reports. So firstly, just to reference the fact the CQC carried out an unexpected and unannounced inspection, unannounced but expected at some point, inspection on emergency care at Belventure in the Royal a couple of weeks ago. They came on, I think, what was probably the busiest day we've had, certainly in terms of ambulances and attendances and so on. So they got to see the organisation at its most stretched in terms of luft. Because it's a statutory inspection, it was only of luft and emergency care, therefore it doesn't affect women. The inspectors were really effusive about the staff and that they were really well looked after. The staff were really keen to speak to them and recognised some really good continuous improvement. They did recognise also some significant pressures around urgent care, which we'll come on to. And what I was going to do is, rather than me tell you that now and then you hear it sort of again in duplicate, that Peter and Nat will talk about their individual feedback for Belventure in the Royal as we get into the verbal updates. But largely, inspection went well, and there were no specific immediate concerns that they needed to raise. Good sign, but we do expect some challenging conversations around some of the busy parts, as you'd expect. A few other bits and pieces, and then I was just going to give a bit of a view going into the last quarter of the year. Just wanted to reference the Strictly event at Liverpool Women's Charity was fantastic. I think nearly double the amount raised previous years. So a lot of people around the table attended that. So they raised 75,000 even sweeter meal, which is great. Also, another couple of really good bits of news around the HFJ Awards, and both the UHL winners. So one for Luft, as was, which was the Scout School initiative helping international recruits bed into working and living in Liverpool, which has now been expanded out to multiple organisations. And then the digital services at Hewitt over at the Women's on the driving efficiency through technology category as well. So really great result for both teams. We've got a list of things that were in the IPR in the back of my report that just highlight where there are anything that is statistically significant that we might want to look at or reference. There's not been a huge change in the last few weeks, as you would expect, and we're still obviously going to get our first view of the new sepsis screening methodology data in early 2025. Everything else is there and referenced, but again, nothing particularly that I wanted to draw out other than the urgent care pressures. Again, ambulance turnaround being the most significant of those, but I know that's a risk that's been raised both at Aintree and the Royal in the last month. So again, I'll let the two acute sites talk about that shortly. I think really all I was going to say in addition to that was we're going into the last 3 months of the year now in a sort of fairly challenging position for, well, not just us, but the NHS as a whole, as we know. The huge increase in flu, particularly RSV, being seen across the country, the impact in the front door of the A&E departments at the Royal and at Aintree. The bed pressures remain just as challenging as ever, and what we're starting to see now is the ambulance turnaround times across the region really becoming a problem, and you've probably seen things around that on the whole of the Northwest. Whilst we don't feature sort of in the headlines on this, there is still always a potential that you can ask what are significantly long waits. When you're looking at an average for an entire organisation, it could be worse on one site or another. And when you're looking at average wait times in an IPR, somebody's waited at the very far end of that. So it is a real issue. But we'll be picking that up again in the report. So I think urgent care is obviously a challenge. The teams are going to talk about what they're doing ahead of the winter to try and maintain safety as best as we can and improve the position. On the rest of the performance side of things, we're holding our own, as you would expect. Winter is always a challenging time around sort of cancelled operations and critical care capacity and so on, but so far, so good. We've got meetings tomorrow just to look at the last quarter of the year from a sort of performance point of view across both the women's and the love sites around 62-day cancer, faster diagnosis standard, and some of the elective work as well. So we'll be able to talk more about that next time. On the quality and safety side of things, again, the metrics generally are where we would expect them to be, but just this obvious pressure issue around urgent care. So the money is the thing where we're going to have the real challenge now, because we're going into the last quarter of the year with a significant proportion of undelivered CIP relating to, again, urgent care pressures and people stuck in hospital who should be cared for at home. If you look at sort of where things are landing for that last quarter, that makes up the majority of the shortfall in sort of the financial plan delivery. The ICB and NHS England are very well aware of that. I've written a response to NHS England around our financial undertakings that highlights the two key issues of that criteria to reside problem. That was a system challenge and a system opportunity to resolve, but has failed perhaps to deliver. And then also the recurring issue of not being appropriately remunerated for the costs of Living Royal, which we have been last year and has been recognised in previous years. So we've made a sort of written representation to NHS England on both those counts to say, you need to respond to this now. We've not had responses for several months, and we're left holding the risk, but we don't have the levers to solve that problem on our own. So we'll come more to that later on in the finance discussion. So I think in summary, it's pretty hot, but things are being managed well. To have gone through that CQC visit without any serious concerns raised, I think is certainly a massive improvement on where this organisation was last year, the year before that, and the year before that, because we, as you know, had lots of serious concerns raised in previous years. They weren't raised this year. I still expect us to be receiving reports that criticise the corridor care, because none of us want to see that. None of us think it's right. So that's one thing we're all on the same page about, whether it's CQC or our clinicians or our board. It's not acceptable to be carrying people on corridors, but that is the situation NHS is in at the moment. And I think we've got some serious considerations to make next year about how we represent, or if we choose to represent, the removal of that problem within our financial planning, because each year we're encouraged to do that. Each year we do it, and then a failure to resolve that problem in the wider system means we're left holding the financial risk, and that's a conversation we need to get into in January. I think that's how we manage that in next year's planning round. So I think that's all I was going to say, Chair. Happy to take any questions on any of those points.
Thank you. A good report, clearly presented. Any questions? Concern? Okay, all good. Let's move on then. Talk about the group-wide risks, please.
Okay, so you've got the corporate risks over 12 there. There's a note at the beginning, and the board will be familiar with this, just to reiterate, that we currently have the corporate 12 and above risks that come through the senior management board and then up into this meeting via this report. Because Liverpool Women's Hospital has its own corporate services and still does at the moment, and that one might change over time, but right now we bring those risks in as well and look at those as the two halves. The key risks to the organisation from a corporate perspective are similar, which are the 65-week elective waiting times. It went up from an 11 to 12 in July, it's still there. We've got a view of where we're heading into for the rest of the year. And again, we've got meetings tomorrow just to go through the projections on that and see if we can improve that position. But at the moment, that's held broadly where it is. But if you look towards the end of the year, that might increase again to sort of the 200 mark. I think when you look at that in the context of the overall Cheshire Mersey view, we'll be right in the packet, not near the top end of performance, but it's still going the wrong way rather than the right way in the winter, which is a slight concern. So we're just going to go through those trajectories tomorrow, see whether there's anything else we can do within the financial climate. On the financial side of things, again, you're well versed in the challenge there, the 18.5 million gap to plan, made up largely of the criteria to reside, the pay award that we haven't been given of 3.5 million, and the strike costs that as well. I think on that one, obviously, as we get into further conversations today, whilst month 8 is better, it is still leaving us holding the problem that we haven't got the solutions to in terms of some of that criteria issue. So we'll come on to that later. Financial balance largely the same. I wanted to raise, because the risk on the overdue follow-ups we talked about last time, they are continuing to reduce, and they are being reviewed in all specialties, as we clarified at the last meeting. So as we've said before, it's a risk everywhere. We've chosen to highlight it here, and we'll continue to maintain that view. It hasn't reduced significantly in terms of the risk yet, but we would be assuming that will start to reduce as we get into next year, but it is coming. They were the key corporate risks. Happy to take any questions on any of those, or on the IPR at the same time, Chair, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Point of question.
Just one on the IPR, Chair. I don't know whether to pick that up now or under the improvement plan report, but and I don't want this to sound a criticism. James outlined the very real operating difficulty, and there's tremendous that we've achieved £80 million worth of forecast savings this year. Despite that, that's really positive, but it's not the plan we set out for, as James has mentioned. And there is a huge problem down the road of only 40 million of the 80 million looks like it's recurring. Just I'm aware that there's a significant churn of senior staff at the local NHS office and at the ICB. Are we satisfied that the difficulties that we see next year are clearly understood by the wider NHS? Yeah, it looks like there's a very significant financial problem next year if we can't convert these savings into recurring numbers.
Yes. So every Tuesday morning, 8:15, Rob and I steel ourselves for 45 minutes of line by line interrogation of exactly those things. Every Tuesday morning, we describe the same problem. Again, conversations we're going to have later, but I was with the ICB chief executive yesterday, just describing, and you'll see some of this in Rob's slides later. Luft, bar one other, Luft is the only organisation, I think, there's two other in the whole of Cheshire Mersey that's in the latest reference cost is significantly improving its reference cost. The others are all going the wrong way. In terms of financial controls, Luft has made the biggest inroads into the reduction of cost control around temporary staffing costs. And a lot of what we've been doing is being used now in other organisations as a sort of guide as to how to do some of this stuff. And then we get separately sort of benchmarks information from the ICB that says what's happening around W2T, workforce management, etc. And again, a lot of these standout examples of the things that we've been doing here to control those costs. So that doesn't mean we're not, and I should just, for the purpose of being clear, the women's is on plan. So that this is more than looked at anything. So what we're able to demonstrate is we're controlling the money, probably as good as or better than most. We're reducing the overhead in the organisation and the total proportion of those costs and managing that as well. The recurring element of CIP is a key topic every Tuesday, and we've been clear around there's still more to do on that in terms of the conversion of some non-recurring things to recurring. We're doing that through forward, depending on how confident we are on some of those things. So to give you an example, and here's another good triangulation point. In the same data that we look at in the ICB, we're now at our highest productivity ever in terms of our theatre utilisation and the amount of work we're getting through the same cost base. So that's enabling us to bank future recurrent savings around income that we've only done in month 8, for example. So you can sort of see, I think, a really good triangulated, well, we're managing it well, but all it's doing is highlighting the obvious elephant in the room problem. There's a problem because every year we manage it as well as we can and then end up, 20, 30, 50, depending on which metric you use on a non-recurrent task away, which is broadly the same as the new hospital costs every year. So there is, and this is what we've highlighted in the letter back to NHS England. So yeah, they're very, very clear. And the letter to NHSE, which actually I'll share with the board so everyone can see that as well, just spells out, we're doing everything we can. We're succeeding in the majority of that. Can we do better? Well, yes, we can always do better. There's a great big unresolved issue here that everyone's just choosing to ignore because there's no money in the broader system. And that's not an acceptable answer. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I've 2 then, please. On the, we talk each month about tackling the issue of overdue follow-up outpatient appointment. And we score this because of the potential clinical risk for people waiting too long. If you feel for whether we make progress in working through all of this, whether the clinical risk is how we would have, I don't know how you generalise it, but how does the clinical risk you feel as we work through them, Jim, and we learn more about it?
So there, as we came out of COVID, there was a process of doing harm reviews on patients, not on cancer pathways, but on other pathways when they had hit certain points along those ways. And what we found from those harm reviews was we picked up very little sign of actual physical harm occurring, though we acknowledged the psychological harm of long waits. So we talked to the regulators and to the commissioners about stopping doing that because it takes up a lot of clinical time. So what we do now is we ask our clinicians to harm review when they actually see the patient, picking up very little in fairness. So we have dropped doing, other than cancer, we've dropped doing harm reviews and we follow it up as we go.
Okay, thank you. My other one around the number of patients waiting over 65 weeks going up now. Is there, again, it's a bit of a generalisation, but is the rate limiting factor on this budget as opposed to, when you talk about the productivity and theatre and so on, the main rate limiting factor, the financial pressure of keeping up with this work, or is there other constraints?
There's other constraints. So there's two key things, I think. So the organisation, when it was a couple of years ago, way out of kilter with everywhere else, had to spend money on outsourcing and sourcing things to try and increase the amount of capacity that we had whilst we improved productivity. So those two things went hand in hand for the last couple of years. That reduced the backlog. As we got into this year, we've improved the productivity, taken us the majority of the year, but we've had to stop spending money on outsourcing and sourcing. It was a greater cost than we were being paid for it, and that's had an impact. There's also an impact on, if you take the broadest RTT numbers as well, 65 weeks I know is sort of operating. There is an impact, I think, when you reduce sort of things like overtime pay and things on the accuracy of the pathways, but that's probably more minor. So you've got this cost issue, or not cost issue. Can we afford to continue to throw money at something by outsourcing patients when we're not receiving significant payment back to cover the cost of that? That's one issue. Second issue is specialist services. So we've got a few specialties, in particular head and neck ENT, where we are the tertiary centre. There's only us that can do the work. These are major cases that take all day long and so on. And there are more people being referred in than there are specialists to undertake that work. And that's a significant issue for us. So again, when we meet tomorrow, we're sort of looking at the numerous plans now at the Aintree site to try and resolve that head and neck and ENT issue. It's also a big issue for West Lancs and others as well. And that is much more complex because that is, these people are just not out there to recruit. So that's a bigger problem. So those two are the key things where either we've got specialist service that's oversubscribed and therefore the waits are longer. And just to point out, if you look at the configuration of most city hospitals, large city hospitals that wouldn't be necessarily fragmented like Liverpool is, you get an overall RTT picture, which is sort of a lot of general work that's generally done in time, and lots of specialist work that waits a lot longer and it averages out. So as we started to look at the 5 trusts here, for example, the collective RTT position of Liverpool is much worse than Lough's view on its own, because Lough's view on its own hasn't got the long waiters in neuro and the long waiters in cardiothoracic in its numbers, and in gynae as well, which is another big. So at the moment, we've got some of those specialist services causing us a problem, and some of it financial. So tomorrow, what we want to be able to bring back to board in January is how far away are we on the money, and what's the potential risk around the performance, and whether there's a need to do something extraordinary around recovering more of that backlog before the end of the year or not. Yeah. The difference, I would say, just to caveat that, is Lough's manages to operate on its patients through winter in a way that general hospitals struggle. Every winter, what you'll see is through the summer, the general hospitals will improve. And in the winter, their elective wards become medicine wards and suddenly they deteriorate. Because of the scale and nature of our organisation at Lough's, that doesn't tend to happen in a specialist division. So we don't tend to drop a whole lot of surgery in the winter. So I would expect by the year end, we'll be probably that's a performance from the worst. Well, does that answer your question? It's sort of
so we'll come back in January. It's just in terms of board expectations. I mean, these are things that got to do with it. It's our expectation that the number of long waits will continue to grow until the end of the business year and beyond.
This is the thing. It's a bit like I think I referred to it once before in a board meeting as a sort of receding waterline, and you start to see where the rocks are. We've got this great big rock in head and neck that we could reduce all the other weights down, but you're still going to have long waiters in head and neck and ENT unless we can come up with some other workforce solution for that, because the number coming in is greater than the number we can operate on. So when you use a sort of median weight or an average weight metric, the organisation will look better. But when you use a longest waiter metric, there'll always be these people in those specialist services that are going to be an issue. And that's been the case for a long time, obviously. We have to be able to manage that. We have to be able to come up with a solution for head and neck, because no matter what metric the government or the NHS decides on in the future, it's always going to come back to the longest waiter. So we've got to resolve it. So again, we've got further conversations tomorrow on some of the plans to do that.
Okay, Mike.
I think if this is too esoteric for now, please just say so. It seems to me there's 3 major financial issues we're trying to resolve. One is the new Royal. 2 is no criteria to resign. We're okay on that. The third one is the imbalance of the system. And if, as we proceed in terms of the group structure, does that resolve the imbalance of the system issue, or is there still an additional thing that we should be mounting an argument about?
There's multiple things, and I'll bring Rob in here if we need to go into the detail. But there's an imbalance in the system. But firstly, let me just caveat with the solution to or the balancing of the financial issue for Lough's as the sort of acute service will never be balanced out or resolved just by the 5 organisations operating differently, because the scale is different. However, And we've got the women's with its sort of structural deficit that, again, in any sort of normal city hospital configuration would be outweighed by specialist income. Whereas here it stands alone and therefore suffers the problem of not being able to cover the costs of things like the insurance and the tariff issue. What's clear is, and we had this conversation yesterday with the ICB with the 5 trusts in the room in our meeting with the Joint Committee and the ICB, it's clear that the flows that have been put in place, particularly from COVID onwards, haven't been quite fair. So to give you an example, equal weighted prorated COVID distribution of monies to organisations that never had a COVID patient. So, things like that have started to create an imbalanced system where we've got organisations across the system that didn't have the costs of the thing that they were being given the money for. And that's led to bank balances in some places being quite healthy and in other places not. The way that income is sort of blown through around some specialist services as well. So I think we're in a better position than we've ever been, because yesterday, hearing the interim CFO and the ICB CEO talk about, we need to reset all of this. Got to get this right, is really encouraging. The second thing is Rob did a presentation yesterday to the Joint Committee about how the 5 organisations are now moving to a single financial framework, which will sort of head through to audit committees next to take a view of. That's about how do we move to the same set of assumptions rather than all operating different financial framework models. And then you can start to see where these issues are. Because for this year, with things like our joint stretch target, it's been a case of trying to move cash from organisation to organisation, which is really not a great way of trying to balance out the problem. But interestingly, the way that that's been transacted is by people giving their top-ups back. There's all these historic top-ups in the system that have been built up over multiple years that just are completely bear no resemblance to the pressures of today. So you could sort of think on the one hand, right, well, that's good because we'll get all the things back into the right order. We'll be able to get SLAs resolved. Because at the moment, you might say, well, you would say this, but actually, when we look at the SLAs, it appears that Luft has had a policy of doing everything for free for the last sort of 10 years because we're not reimbursed for the vast majority of the specialist stuff that we do across the wider system. And we need to reconcile that. All that needs to be thought about in the context of next year. There's not only not enough money for the ICB commissioned activity, there's not enough money for the specialist commissioned activity. So the whole pot is going to shrink. But we would assume a more fair and equal distribution is the right thing. And Rob did a really good job of describing how the 5 CFOs are trying to create that sort of level playing field, treated as a single pot of money. And I think that will expose all sorts of mechanisms that will put us to where we've got to. So yes, I think it will help, Mike. I think it'll improve the overall picture, but it's not going to be a panacea because there's just not enough money.
No, I think any other points? Yes, Matt.
Yeah, just in terms of the 65-week issue, I think we're looking at other, solutions, the digital solutions to support. So in terms of that RTT pathway, we're looking at, we're procuring a new system that will simplify and streamline some of those referral processes from specialist into specialist services, and head and neck is within scope of the first tranche. So we're going to be sort of joined with that work, so supporting that.
And on the business case for the system that you're buying, how much time are you going to take out of the pathway for a patient going from one specialist trust to another?
That's a good question, and we'll bring that back next time. That's okay. I'll fit that way.
Patient pass.
Patient pass, yeah.
So in previous organisations, so when Pete and I worked in Salford, this was implemented in renal as a start point, which is one of the easier ones to do, mainly because the treatments are largely sort of changes in medication treatments based on blood results and other things. But it was significant. I mean, this was patients were being sent from, say, Wigan to Salford on a daily basis, and they were able to be retained at site, and then the specialists documented advice based on blood results and other things. So there is a very good chance that this could stem the tide of urgent referrals, because if you think about specialist services, neuro's a good example, because again, that was a Salford issue. Neuro's tidal wave of referrals for everybody that's got a headache, basically. And that's not a joke, or I'm not trying to be glib there. That literally the vast majority of referrals into neuro are persistent headache. And the majority of the time, it doesn't even warrant a neuro referral. And using patient pass, they were able to ask 3 or 4 questions and just exclude the need for that transfer Whereas today, referral letter, off you go. 5 months later, I don't know why you're here, I didn't need to see you. So I think there will be some value in that. So we'll be able to bring back some further information on that. And I'm sorry, Chair, I'm here, but under the CEO report, I completely forgot to mention that we've had the successful approval to outline business case to go out for procurement now, the electronic patient record, which is a huge piece of it going forward to resolve this issue. And I know I've informally mentioned that to board members, but publicly should mention that that's fantastic news, because that means we can have an electronic patient record that will not only be for this organisation, UHL, but will also expand to the 5 organisations across Liverpool. And finally, patients and clinicians will be able to share successfully all the things that we know stymie that. Again, that could well be a very significant help with referrals, because we have these odd issues at the moment where it is easier to bring someone over to assess them because you can't see any information about them.
Great. Very, very good news on the EPR. Well done to all it. Game changing for us in the way. Okay, let's talk sites. Who's going first?
Okay, if I start with CQC, so CQC goes some high level feedback. So the general overview was the medical director and the lead inspector. The medical director has been to over 200 departments, and he thought we had an excellent ED. He said the staff had been clearly very busy and were working under pressure. I think particularly on the second day of the inspection at the Royal, we were under significant escalation. But they said all staff were open and honest and appreciated how frank the staff have been and with the team. There were 2 issues that they referenced. One was that we are running some dual documentation systems, so there's some paper and some electronic systems in place in the ED. They didn't reference those with significant safety concerns. I think it was more of an efficiency and improvement we could make going forward. And the other was obviously, as James has touched on, they referenced the non-ideal environments that they saw patients being cared for, so the corridor care, and they saw some long waiting patients in seated environments in the emergency department. We're aware of those, and obviously we talk about those regularly, but they were the 2 things really that they raised from the Royal. Just on HMB, so HMB yesterday, I think the main thing, as James touched on, was when you look at the IPR, if you triangulate around the urgent emergency care metrics, you can see from a Royal perspective in the last month, we've seen a significant increase in attendances, as we'd already touched on, coming on from October and November. But we've seen increased lengths of stays in department and ambulance handover delays. We had reduced that in the summer period. We reduced the risk around assessment and ambulance handover because remember we weren't using corridor care for a number of months and we had real improvement in the metrics. So that was a 10. That will be back at a 12 when you get the report in January. Just touching on what we're doing to try and support the site into winter. So we've been running at the Royal the Ho Ho Home for Christmas campaign. We have seen some real, everyone's laughing because we've set up a discharge grotto. We've tried to get some good morale around it with the teams. We've seen some
We're
real.
broadcasting this live.
So
Not just us listening to this.
So we're trying to work with particularly Liverpool and Merseycare colleagues to try and really support discharge and get patients home with their loved ones ahead of the Christmas period. We've seen some real traction on that, and we've maintained the length of stay improvements even through December that we'd gained. I think the pressure, though, what we have seen is a real rise in respiratory and acuity presentations over the last 2 or 3 weeks. When we went on the national briefing, that is something that's been seen up and down the country. We had the latest community prevalence sent to us this week, Pete, and that's continuing to grow. So we're expecting this pressure to continue for the next 2 to 3 weeks. What we have done at the Royal in particular, so this week we commenced primary care streaming over in the walk-in centre. So we haven't had primary care over in the Linda McCartney. If you remember, we lift and shifted the city walk-in centre. We've now expanded that, so we've got 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, including bank holiday provision to the end of March, primary care. That started on Monday, and that is seeing 40 patients a day. We've filled every slot. So the aim for that will be to try and decompress the ED waiting room and bring that time to be seen down so that our consultants can concentrate on the most acute and unwell patients. In January, we will open our joint general surgery and neurology assessment unit. Again, this is something that wasn't in place when we moved to the new Royal. The aim of that will be to make that 24/7, which it isn't currently. That will be towards the end of Jan, but that should be a big improvement. And we've reviewed our continuous flow policy. So this is something we do for ED in times of escalation. We're needing to work on that policy, but we have never done it in surgery. We've started it in surgery this week. The general surgical consultants have reviewed that and signed it off. So really good work across the divisions, but we've now got continuous flow across both divisions at the Royal. And I suppose the other thing, joking about the ho-ho over Christmas, what we have done is use that as a way to review our flow policies and protocols daily across the organisation. So we now have reviewed all our capacity director, action cards, OPAL responses. So going into January, we now have a new framework that we would work to, and we would stand up extra support for the site as and when we trigger the relevant OPAL levels. So we've been trialling that through the Home for Christmas approach, and that's in place ready for the new year. I suppose the final bit, which we'll touch on, which will be the same with Aintree, is you'll see in the improvement plan. I think the greatest challenge still sits around, we talk P1s, but the most complex issues is around those going into long-term placements. So we're working and have set up a new daily meeting with Liverpool Council, where we are in essence like a patient tracking list, where we're working together to try and place the most sort of difficult patients. I suppose two things are coming out of that, and we're meeting tomorrow to go through this with the leads from Merseycare Council. There is definitely a shortfall of certain bed capacity, so not general residential, but once we get into dementia care EMI, there is a shortfall of available beds. So we need to discuss how we're going to manage that. And then the brokerage function has moved to the council, but there is a capacity issue around tracking and supporting those discharges, and that's something we'll be picking up with the council tomorrow, how we improve that in January. There are short-term external options available that I have used before, and I'm going to be presenting some of those options to the council tomorrow. So they're the main things really for the Royal.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, do you want to know about finances as well? Sorry, I hadn't touched on finances. So finances at the Royal, sorry, it is in the pack. So we're at 7.4 million year-to-date deficit. Basically, that is all around undelivered CIP. You'll see we've underdelivered the CIP by 7.9 million year-to-date. We've transacted 22 million CIP full year effect, of which 21 million is recurrent. We are forecasting in the region of 25 to 26 million at the minute CIP, which is obviously away from our 39.5 billion target. At Hostel Management Board, yesterday we've agreed a series of workshops in January where we're going to be inviting a lot of the wider clinical teams to come and support us in how we try and either expedite the schemes that are already on the tracker, or we're going to need to replace them and be working on the new schemes to bridge that gap. So our focus at the Royal, really, we've got the grip and control in, and I think we're quite confident on what that's delivering, but we need to continue the focus on CIP development.
Jackie.
Thanks, Natalie. I just wondered about the CQC, talked about their comments around corridor care, but obviously we've also had the NHS guidelines out on temporary escalation spaces. And I'm just wondering, and I'm absolutely, not for corridor care, but sometimes there's nowhere else to go, is there, and that. But how are the CQC going to manage that? Did they talk about that? Because I'm worried that they're going to criticise us, yet actually there's guidance that's come down, even though we as an organisation, we don't really support that as a desensitisation.
Absolutely. So I had that guidance on the Monday. CQC goes feedback on the Tuesday. I think for me, we had that discussion, and I did raise with them, this is in place, this is a national issue. I think they recognise that, but they won't obviously recommend corridor care. What I am confident of is we have SOPs and we make that corridor care as safe as we can. And I'm absolutely confident in the provision we're giving to patients on that corridor. So we'll be providing all that evidence back to them. So whilst they will comment on the non-ideal environment, I'm hoping they recognise that it is safe care for patients, and we're doing the best we can for the patients while we're on those corridors.
And my second one, and it's to David, it's just around the overall pressure ulcers going up, because I'm assuming it's from the front end rather than from patients with criteria to reside. So I just wondered if there's anything there that is jumping out at you.
Thank you. I'll just touch on the point that Natalie has just mentioned. The issue around corridor care, we know that Cheshire and Merseyside identified a document called Red Lines in corridor care, and that was based mostly on the SOPs that had been developed within our organisation. And we have colleagues from Liverpool Place coming in the early new year of how we are performing against that document. I think that it was also again worth repeating. CQC see anything patients were at risk or had come to harm whilst on the corridor. It was the environment that they took exception to, and quite rightly, because we do also. With relation to the pressure ulcers, we've seen that there is statistically from this month of category 2 pressure ulcers. I've asked for a review of that, particularly around particular areas, sites, and patient groups. I would believe that it's more to do with those patients who are waiting longer in areas, perhaps at the front of the, but I don't want that to be my narrative when that's any better information. We know that we've also been carrying out work around when patients are having enhanced care, and we've changed the way in which we've been doing that we've also been looking at associated harms. And I just want to make sure that I'm not missing a salient point there.
Thank you. Just on the pressure ulcers, we discussed this yesterday in the site director of nursing. So we're seeing them a lot on the acute medical unit. So we are reviewing that course because potentially it's directly linked to it anyway to stay. But we'll be working through that detail, Jackie, over the coming week. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to say thank you for raising that, because following our discussion of the week, that's a really good example of that's just turned to statistically. My question, obviously, and it's already been triggered through the HMBs to go and look at now. Why is that suddenly triggering? So I think just a good illustration of what we were talking about.
Thank you. Got Mike then, Jeffrey.
Thank you. It's a quick avoidance of doubt question, and ask Pete a bit of the same one. So in terms of CQC, historically, the difficulty has been that they find things that we didn't know. That kind of surprises thing that get either the impression or the reality of us not having a grip. I know they haven't written yet, but are there any significant surprises?
No, not that I know of, and I'd be surprised if I think we're.
During their reviews of the various sites, you'll always get sort of an individual patient circumstance. So, for example, we saw this patient who should not have been prescribed this and was about to be, and we've looked at it. So there's those sort of minor things, but the general points, as we said earlier, David asked in both meetings with Aintree and the Royal, is there anything that is an immediate action? And the answer was no. So we know that there was nothing that was triggered an immediate need to do something, which is always a good sign. But as has been well discussed today, they're worried about the same things we're worried about, but at least we're worried about the same things. So, yeah.
Looking at the respiratory referrals and admission, what initiatives are there in the community to head these cases off at the pass? Because often they're predictable, aren't they? COPD and all the rest.
Yeah.
I know in St Helens, it's one of the dental networks has an MDT now, be more proactive because you can predict those who are going to fall in the cracks. What is that big? Is that going on here? And what could more be done so you don't get them turning up in the first place? You're better managed in the community, which is better for everybody in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I might compete in a second as the respiratory expert, but there is a community respiratory service, obviously, that we actually deliver from the Royals. We have that community wraparound in place. We also, on top of that, have the virtual ward, which we have been maximised utilisation in the last few weeks. So I think there's an awful lot going on around admission avoidance with respiratory. What we are seeing, though, is people are acutely unwell. They're not coming in and they are people that's why the ED are then admitting them because they are in distress and need to be admitted. But I don't repeat it. I think you want to.
No, you're absolutely right. So there's a community respiratory team that's actually managed through Aintree, but actually mostly on that site, but it covers the whole field. So from our nosebleed patients linking with heart, chest, on the community respiratory fields there. That's why it's harder to actually predict, particularly some of COPD, getting an exacerbation, it's easier actually to get them home earlier. But the virtual ward is the key bit to it, Jeffrey, as you know, and there's two elements to that. There's the acute respiratory infection element, so anyone can get an acute respiratory infection, and then the exacerbation of COPD. And what we're seeing is occupancy of that virtual ward is increasing over the last few months, actually up to around 82% now, which is good because we have been lower than that. So we've been working really hard to make use of that virtual respiratory ward, both for acute respiratory infection, as you say, but also for exacerbations of COPD.
So the assurance I'm getting is that there are no patients that you see. Do you think actually if this had been done earlier, that would have been avoided?
No, that the feedback that I've been getting when I'm meeting with the clinical teams at the minute is they've got acutely unwell patients, and that's why there is the pressure in the corridor care, because they need to come in and have hospital-based care. From a Royal perspective, what we have stood up in the last, it was about 6 weeks ago, we have direct access to the SDEC facility. We have a GP phone line in place that is being well utilised. So where we can as well, they are being directly sent to there and turned around within the same day to avoid ED. So I think we've got more than we have ever had at the Royal in place to try and deflect from ED.
That's the assurance I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Let's move on, Peter.
Chair, so I'm just going to highlight probably three things: CQC, urgent care, and particularly the ambulance handovers, and then I'll talk about the financial position for them. Just to give a broad view, HMB, so there's an increase in 113 risk, which is ambulance handover, which I'll come back to, but 12 risks there, greater than 12 on the register. One has gone up, which is the 65 weeks. We've talked about that, so I would cover that in my briefing. So firstly, this comes to CQC. The feedback similar to what NASA's given. Firstly, they were very praising of the staff. They said they were welcoming, they were open, honest and transparent. And I think the phrase they used was they made the CQC's job easy, which is always good to hear. They also gave some feedback from patients. And I know they spoke to a lot of patients on the first day, spoke to less patients on the second day because the feedback was quite consistent in that the patients said they felt well cared for, which was pleasing to hear. Patients recognised that there were delays in the ED, but understood the reasons why, and they could see the staff were working hard to mitigate those. They also said that staff, this was the patient's feedback, that staff were very caring and kind. Again, good to hear. And generally, there was no complaints, or certainly none they told us, from patients to the CQC on those 2 days. Then some positive feedback. They said they saw the department in itself that worked well. They said that staff, and they called out particularly junior staff, were well supported to do their job, and they said that they could see that there was senior decision making early on, and that was appropriate. And they also said that staff had lots of ideas how to improve the department, so that was a good thing. So we must harness that. As Nat said, they did point out some things, and just to answer Mike's point, none of these were surprises to us. Certainly not to me, anyway. They called it the corridor, as Nat has said. They couldn't say they could say that was a good thing, and none of us will agree that no one must see corridor care, but they could see the patients were being cared for on it. They also saw that they could see and recognise our plans to improve that, but they hadn't taken fruition as of yet. They also called out boarding. They said they could see that we were doing it and we'd implemented a continuous flow policy, but that boarding wasn't having enough impact yet to try and decompress the emergency department. I think that was a fair comment. And the final thing they pointed out in terms of things we are working on was that they could see that our SDEC model wasn't being as effective as other examples they'd seen around the country. And again, I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just conscious. Same day emergency care.
Sorry, same day emergency care. Sorry, I'll use lots of abbreviations. So same day emergency care model, which is essentially where a patient will go straight to the acute physicians. They could see that there was scope to increase that. And again, of course, we recognise that, and we're working with ESIS particularly on that to try and improve the flow through the SDEC. So that was the CQC feedback. In terms of urgent care, as Nat has recognised, we particularly see those in the entry around delays in discharge of P1, P3 patients. We've currently got 51 pathway 1 patients. These are patients who go home with some extra social care support, waiting for discharge, and 83 pathway 3 patients waiting to go to nursing or residential care. And that occupancy levels are increasing since October. The ambulance handover, you can see that clearly on the IPR, and particularly the Aintree IPR. Both the length of delay in November, it was 91 minutes for an average ambulance handover, which was significantly higher than it's been throughout the year, running about 50 minutes, and also the numbers of patients waiting more than 40 minutes, that's gone up clearly on the IPR. So that is a clear pressure for us at Aintree. What we're doing around that is, and we showed the CQC this, and they recognised actually they've come in the midst of these changes, and we're also having regular calls now with the NHS Northwest region about the improvements we're putting in around the ambulance handovers. Is that we've made some changes, and I've talked about this in previous boards. We've moved our same day urgent care unit from one end of the ED to the other end of the ED, closer to the majors. That's allowed us now to maximise deflection at the front door. And the first time we put that in, we saw a massive spike improvement in terms of our non-admitted ED performance. So about 20% increase up into about 80. So it does work when we get it up and running. And so that's now been running since the day the CQC arrived, actually. So we made that change the day they arrived. And also now we're able to move our ambulatory majors into that area as well to decongest the ED. So that's helpful. We're also, and these changes are happening and should be in place hopefully tomorrow, that we're now going to create 20 extra ambulance cohort areas within the ED by making use of the observation ward. And we're going to move the vascular clinic E, which is literally opposite the ED, up into the old Sudoku, which we've moved out of. And then that'll allow us to have an ambulance cohort area as well. So that'll give us 20 extra spaces. What that will do is allow us to use there's a pit stop area into the emergency department, which is designed to have immediate ambulance handover and triage. We're going to keep that night absolutely for pit stopping and an ambulance handover. So that will make the flow out of ambulance better, I think. So that's good. We've also implemented a 2-hour ambulance huddle so that we know what's coming in, we know what we're doing, and we've got the ambulance service in that huddle as well at 2 hours during the day. So that'll be good. And the final bit in that jigsaw is now to try and really make sure we're directly conveying patients from ambulance into our emergency medicine. That's the aesthetic bit, and also into frailty, which is working pretty well. If we keep that embedded, that will improve. So that's this. And then finally, just in terms of other things we're doing to keep, so that's a key bit to keep ourselves safe over winter. It might be some those changes, but as Nat has said, we're doing we're not doing home, we're doing home for Christmas, but not basically. And also we're working with drop the home for a bit, we're just doing home for Christmas. And we're working with Broad Green around that reablement front door pathway to make sure we're making good use of that. And because I think there's definitely scope for improvements in the entry. And obviously, as I've said in previous meetings, I hope for the extra capacity of Ward 95 as well to give us some space to get patients admitted when they need to. Finally, just the finances, going to brief overview. Month 8 overall, we were £500,000 adverse to plan, taking us to 11.1 million year to date. Briefly running through, income was 1.1 million better than plan, taking us about 4 million better than plan year to date. Pay was 1 million over in month 8, but there was some in-month changes. So you look at the run rate, that's probably about 0.4 million over plan, which is a sort of, it's stable to come last month, but it is significantly improved in terms of run rate to where we were mid-summer, for example. If we come just to CIP, we achieved 2.8 million in a month, which was just shy of the 3.2 million target, second best monthly entry, taking us to a position of transacted year to date 17.8 million, which is a 5 million shortfall from where we should be currently. The positive in the CIP is a 3.3 million improvement in the recurrent status this month in month 8, and that was really due to the work I said we were doing and reported last month on the pay-related CIP. So we've seen a 3.3 million improvement by 10.5 million in terms of recurrent CIP at Aintree transacted year to date. Okay, so I'll pause there.
Which questions, please? Peter, Aintree side, Tom.
So a question for both really. There was an issue around the winter pressures money that didn't materialise in the ICT the last time we met. Has it actually materialised now?
So it's evaporated. So this is the first year we've had no winter funding, since any of us can remember. So the costs are still there. So we put provision in place to put things in place that we would then expect usually to get met with additional money. But
There was some internal money, Tom, so there's stuff on the yeah, so yeah, but we've utilised that at the entry for some of the extra capacity and also some offloading in terms of critical care and that 13 risk I had. So.
But usually we would put provision of 1 million or 2 in winter and then see that met. This year, the costs are there.
Jim, please.
And thanks. Just helpful for a board to note, I think, in terms of scrutiny of the EDs, that Rowan Pritchard-Jones, who's the medical director of the ICB, came on Monday to look at both. So we spent a couple of hours at each. Rowan met lots of the staff and had a good look around, and that he was very, encouraged, I think, honestly, by what he saw. And of course, they were both busy on Monday morning as usual, but this is very significant because of course, Rowan sees this across the system. He's looking at how other EDs are performing, but also the relationships with NWAS and other colleagues. So it was very helpful for Rowan to talk to Blue and to Jay, in particular, the 2 CDs, and really get under the skin of what their issues were.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for raising that, Jim. I was just going to mention it myself because I met the ICB CEO yesterday, who was here for the joint committee meeting, and had just told me that he'd actually come to do a walk around at Aintree. I don't think he told anybody at Aintree he was going to do that, but he was coming to walk around Aintree ED. But he then was told by Rowan that he'd been and felt that he'd had some really significant assurance from that visit. So it did go very well. So again.
Yeah, just like he told me, James, but he did tell me he wasn't going to come because Rowan had been, but he is now coming with the new CEO of NWAS on the 7th of January, so I'll take him around then, which I think is helpful because we'll be able to show him the changes we've made. And in terms of we've had quite a few visitors in RDD in the last 10 days or so. I've also taken around Chris Grant, who's the medical director of NWAS, and showed him the areas and the changes I've described. So he is happy with those as well. Right. So we are working with our partners to try and make sure that we're keep getting the animals offloaded.
Any other? Next. I think the ambulance handover, as discussed, still the number of 60-minute plus handovers is still rising very significantly. We see, unsurprisingly, the average time going up. Could we report? Is it possible at future meetings to report this in a different way so we can get a sense of what the average is derived from? Do we measure median weight so we know what most people experience is just over the 60 minutes, just over the 90 minutes, or have we got a wider range?
Routinely do it, but I'm sure we could provide something in the verbal update, perhaps that gives that, because the data is just pulled from the same data set that we get from all the ICB turnaround metrics. But as I would imagine, we'd be able to say within in our narrative, here's what it looked like.
I wonder if it'd be more helpful if you want to see the NWAS do the percentiles of how they manage to respond to Cat 1 and 2 in the community, because I suppose that's the biggest impact, isn't it? Is biggest impact how quickly they get that ambulance back in. So we see where we are with that.
All right, thank you, Peter.
So just to remind the board, there's no CQC update from Paul Wimpers and Julie Mays, who are separately registered, and we were not inspected in terms of the visits over the previous weeks. So no updates in that respect. We held our hospital management board on Tuesday, and we viewed our 5 risks greater than 12, which substantially haven't changed since the last time we met. But we did hear some positive updates in relation to the labour produced for the 2nd consecutive month, which was really encouraging. And we also discussed some additional medicines risks that we wanted some further information on. And we have already, though, got our risk 12 plus already noted in our interim report. We received our assurance group reports, which were all moderate, with nothing to flag through to board. And similarly in performance, nothing new or additional to report this month. But again, just to remind people, Liverpool Women's doesn't feel the winter pressures in the same way that the Luft organisations do. Our busy period for maternity is September and neonates is June, July time. So we don't feel the same stresses and strains of winter pressures through the organisation. We reviewed in some detail the CNST submission, which is on the board agenda later on today, and which the LMNS are going to join us for. We approved submission of that, recognising that there were just 2 doctors to be trained outstanding before that submission, and you'll see that when Di and David present the report later on. Again, finance, we are a similar position to last month. So our deficit plan for Liverpool Women's is 11.6 million, and at month 8 we reported a 7.8 million deficit, which is slightly ahead of plan. We are forecasting to deliver our plan for the year, but as is the case across Luft organisations as well, there is dependence on non-recurrent solutions to deliver that, which will move into next year. From a CIP point of view, we have delivered 4.4 million of cost savings by month 8, but only 1.7 million of that was recurrent. So we've got an issue moving into next year. The cost improvement portfolio board meets every fortnight and is really focused on next year's plan now and how we transform some of that delivery into recurrent moving forward into next year, recognising that Liverpool Women's has done a lot over the years in terms of efficiency and getting costs down, and actually has had to invest over previous years in terms of safety on site, which we were talking about reference costs earlier on. Women's reference costs are going up as a result of additional investments that are going in on site, but we maintain the grip and control procedures and control that have always been in place. And finally, just to note, we received an application for approval for submission to become university hospital accredited, which Liverpool Women's isn't yet. So we are expecting to submit an application next month to achieve university status as a hospital, which is really good and really encouraging. So other than that, nothing in particular to update.
Excellent, thank you, James. These are not questions, just a couple of points. I think it was great to see statistically significant now for the first time the reduction in vacancies. So that's been well maintained, because that was a huge issue. I know a year or 2 ago at the women's, particularly maternity, this is the overall vacancies, but that vacancy rate is really low, which is brilliant. And it was just to contest your winter pressures analogy, because the neonatal consultants tell me that they're very busy over Christmas because everyone wants their section before Christmas.
So interestingly, when we did the walk around this week, there was a lot of the units, using fetal and neonates and others who do this week particularly is busy.
Yeah. So they were saying the obstetricians get all the babies out just in time to be very busy over Christmas. Different set of winter pressures. Thank you. Very good. And great news on the university.
So I've got Sarah, then Daniel.
Chair, just a couple of observations really. In the performance reports now, we've lost the narrative. So we've got parts, but we have a summary of where actions were needed, particularly on the NEBA events and the open certs, which are both showing kind of concerning trends. That was included in your update. Either of you got comments on either of?
Just to clarify, Sarah, that's because today's board isn't the normal board with all the reports.
Oh, okay.
Because so there's no reports for any of the sites. It's because the hospital management boards occurred yesterday and the day before.
Okay.
So if we're a week early, that'll be replaced.
But I can pick those up. There's been no new NEBA events in the month. The 4 is the cumulative total. PSERF is no issues on that.
So those reports will follow. It's just the meetings that usually feed the board that would normally be at the end of next week. What we just had in the last 24 hours.
Just on, just backing up on Dennis, the discussion about university hospital status is a key aspect. So the HMB, we reviewed all the evidence provided. It then gets submitted to the University Hospitals Association. James has got to sign a letter that we're going to do in the next few days. And that's going to the University Hospitals Board, I think on the 22nd.
I need to turn up for
University Hospitals Association Board on the 22nd of January. So by the time of the next board, we're hoping to get clarification of that. It'll be a major step for Liverpool Women's that's been trying to get the status for a number of years, and a lot of the good work that Lynn Greenhouse and the team have done to get the evidence ready has been substantial.
Your fingerprints on this anywhere, Tom?
No, they're not. It will cost you, what, 10,000 a year?
No, it's not. No, it's about 3,000.
3,000.
£3,000.
I'll give it Tom.
But actually, the year after will be free because the University Hospitals Associations is being hosted by NHS providers. That should be covered in our NHS providers membership.
Whole set of renegotiations on subscriptions to do.
Yeah.
To be a university hospitals Liverpool group without university status would be slightly.
Well done, Chair. Any more questions? Okay, thank you. Rob, LCL.
LCL, thank you, Chair. We met yesterday afternoon. An update from the Hospital Management Board. No risks to report over 12. So that's made, but we do have 12 high risks that we've reviewed, 10 plus. Just to call out a couple of the key risks in our minds. Last time we talked about the transfer of the transfusion service system at Aintree onto the system that we have across the rest of the hospital. That remained a risk for us. However, we've got the plan in place to transfer on the 6th of January. That has been signed off and approved by MHRA and it's been to Aintree Management Board. I think we're all content with the plan and the mitigations around that. That's good, but clearly remains a risk until it's transferred. Second risk continues to be the risk around pathology and histopathology and meeting the targets. The continued demand and opportunity for us to meet that target remains challenging, not least because of the recruitment of the staff. We mentioned last time we have got 2 new consultants starting with us, but we have had some churn as well. So we're kind of running on ice in that area. We did have another conversation around the patient harm, and it was confirmed that the patient harm is known, although obviously the quality of the service struggle to maintain the target set. The third item, which is most concerning, is the continued risk of industrial action. Now, there was an indicative ballot for strike, and that was a positive ballot that there could be a strike. We've been trying to fully understand the issues around that, and we think it's staffing. And as I mentioned last time, one of the task and finish groups that we set up specifically is one of those hot point areas in microbiology. That task and finish group reported yesterday. Actually, when you look at the benchmarking, we are adequately staffed, but nevertheless, we're continuing to work with all colleagues to try and get that message across. Unions stepped down from the partnership meeting with LCL on Tuesday, so we've got to continue that work clearly. The other 2 task and finish groups that we have are working well. One was around chemistry IT training, and that's on track so that everybody will be trained by the end of March. And the third area is the environment around his cellular pathology. It's a really tricky one, this. So we've got a task and finish group that contains all members of staff, management and staff on the ground. There's an ongoing issue about ventilation, and it's not an issue of necessarily cost, although there would be a cost to put in a new system. To put in a new system would take the lab out for around about 2 weeks, which is not really feasible. What we are looking into is some novel solutions that aren't available in the UK, but are used in Europe, where actually the standards are even higher. And so we're going to be investigating that in the next weeks as to whether that is a solution we have available to us. Finally, just to note on the finances, we are ahead of plan at month 8 by £670,000. It relayed the challenge back to the team around could we go further. and pleased to say that our forecast by the end of the year now is at 500,000 above plan by the end of the year, and we've reduced that particular risk in our risk register as well to keep that live. Happy to take any.
Thank you. Any questions for Rob? Laboratories? Okay, well done, Rob. Broad Green, some trepidation, I'll come back to you.
No, there was only one issue emerging at Broad Green, which is in relation to sickness absence. You'll see in the IPR, we've got nearly 8% sickness absence rate at the minute at Broad Green. I received a report outside of HMB that gave me assurance around the management of the sickness absence, but it remains that we've now got a risk around staffing our core wards Green, as we are getting very little take up of bank shifts to support. So we're going to be looking between the Royal and Broad Green at mitigation plans of how we support the site, and I'm on with that with the Director of Nursing currently to make sure we can keep all those beds open to support the winter plans. Other than that, the other thing we reviewed at Broad Green to note is the financial position. So we are £130,000 better than plan for month 8. And we've delivered 2.34 million against the 2.5 million CIP. The main issue previously at Broad Green was the fact that most of that was non-recurrent. I've reviewed the position with the team, and we've managed to make another 800,000 of it recurrent in month 8, and we're continuing the review across the other schemes. So that's the main focus financially at Broad Green at the minute, is to try and make that CIP achievement recurrent by the end of the year.
Excellent, thank you. Points, questions, Broad Green? When did we get picking up on the staff sickness point? When did we go on vaccination rates with stuff? Well,
we got to frontline staff was about 36% or flu, slightly.
These are the lowest figures we ever had. Feel about that.
Flu, I'm just pulling them up now on my phone, just for the latest position, because there has been a national uptake in flu since a huge case of flu going to ED, it seems, but I'm just pulling the latest numbers up. Again, we've had this conversation in previous years. We've had the same conversation in the Women's Board. Most people are. We seem to be stuck in this sort of vaccine apathy situation. If we look at the inputs are all same as or largely greater than we've done in previous years. More availability, more roadshows, more access to the vaccines, or made it easier to do it, advertise them in different methods, less people take them up. So without mandating vaccines, and let's not go back there, we're going to have a real problem if this continues on this trend. Here we are, latest. So current progress. I've got a Lufton through the ESR, but 60% in doctors, 31% in 50% in qualified medical, 44% in the rest of the supporting staff. That's the Luft numbers. I don't get the women's one on the phone yet, but I think it'll be largely similar.
Yeah, but if not potentially lower.
Yeah.
Is it down from previous years, Jenny?
Yeah.
Yes.
The women's is generally lower than others as well, with different risk factors around the patients that they see, obviously, and age profile of the workforce.
Just on the Broad Green sickness, as an example, though, very little of it is actually anything to do with short-term sort of respiratory. It's an awful lot of social stress and things going outside of work. Stress and anxiety is the biggest contributing factor at the minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we're doing everything we can. I'm assured that you can't walk down the corridor without someone trying to jab you. Moments, it's people just don't want to. Okay,
that completes the site report. Good, thank you. Rob, we've heard the bottom line on progress with cost improvements and variant budget of the sites. Take us into the overall financial report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I will start with just quickly LWH, just to reconfirm that on day we're ahead of plan, and we are projecting to hit our plan by the end of the year. The point we've been drawn out in the board report is that does include the system stretch target, and we've got a mechanism for transferring that between the organisation. So again, rather clumsily, but that's where we are at the moment, and that's included for the pointed out in the forecast hit plan at the end of the year. In terms of Luft, again, you can see that we're showing a deficit position of 65 million at the end of month 8 versus a plan of 59.4. That's a variance of 5.7 million. That's actually an improvement month on month. So we were at a variance of 7 million in month 7. So that's good news. We're holding our ground, in fact, improving a little bit. Again, within that, we have actually been able to transact 3.7 million of the system stretch target into Luft, and that was forecast for Q4. So there's some offset there. The key items of risk within there are that we've got the CIP as noted, and that is whilst we've transacted 52.8 million to date, which again, month 8 is the highest we've ever done, and recognises all the hard work that's been going on. That remains 7.7 million away from our target, and that's a major contributor to our variance. That translates to an in-year forecast of 67.4 million. So again, a really good positive transactive position, but clearly that's not where that leaves us a gap of around about 40 million. The recurrent element year to date is 30.4, which translates to a 45 million pounds full year effect going forward. So again, recurrently, that does give us an issue, and we'll talk about that later on. The other key items that have been referenced as risks: new hospital remains unfunded, and we continue to for that to be resolved, as James mentioned earlier. The strike costs, I think, are sunk, as we talked about last time, so that leads to the 2 million challenge. The 3.5 million underfunded pay award, again, is a live conversation, and that's not just with Luft, that's across the system and the NHS. So that's one that we remain hopeful of, but we clearly recognise that that there's no money in the overall NHS at the moment. Winter remains a risk, and again, we've not received the monies. So if we were to have a poor winter, that could impact our income and our activity. So that could see a further deterioration, but that's not factored into our plan at the moment. In terms of the system position, so I think it's important to put us in the context of the system. The system put forward a plan at the start of the year of 150 million deficit. That was funded by NHSE. As at month 8, Cheshire and Merseyside are 67.3 million away from that trajectory. So if you compare Luft as a percentage of that variance trajectory, we're about 8% of that variance to using 25% of the resources. So there's clearly pressures elsewhere other than Luft, not least the ICB themselves make up about 60% of that variance at month 8. So a real challenging environment. As has been also noted, within our overall forecast, we have a commercial settlement scheduled for month 12, which, whilst we remain confident about the value, the timing is significantly at risk. And again, we've highlighted that to NHSE. Finally, just to end on a positive, We have improved our reference cost with all the hard work last year. So this is the 23-24. We were at 116 reference costs, which was one of the highest in Cheshire and Merseyside. We're now at 110 for Luff, which puts us well and truly in the pack. And as we've seen, most people going actually in the opposite direction. So it does show the hard work is biting, but nevertheless we remain with significant risk around the year, and as has been mentioned, going then on to next year. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Look, with the board's in agreement with a private meeting because of some commercial business to do later. Can I ask if we're happy to pick up the broader financial discussion in the part 2 meeting? Move on the stage. Or anything?
Could I just?
Yes, Tracy, of course.
Just the way that the LWH reports risk, it suggests that the transaction of that 2.9 is just between the two organisations. Just think when we minute it, clearly this has been something that was actually done on a wider group. And I think we just need to stress that had been anticipated and planned all year, but it isn't just between the two organisations. I think we just need to make sure we minute it.
No, absolutely. For avoidance of doubt, the element in LWH, which is part of the 15 million that was an ICB target.
Yes, if we could minute it that way.
Thanks, Tracy. That's helpful. Okay, we'll pick up.
One quick comment. And obviously it's not impacting this financial year, but with the conversations ongoing about the unfunded pay increase, thinking ahead into next financial, and we've got the next impact. Is that part of the conversation, or are we heading into potentially a bigger pay issue next year and beyond with contributions?
No, it is part of it. I think what we've historically seen is that there's a shortfall in pay award funding year on year, so we have to take it bite, I think. So again, LWH have 800,000 kind of shortfall on funding this year, so we're batting for that, and then obviously in the planning round we will get into trying to be appropriately funded.
And do we have a view on what the national insurance increase will be across them?
No, but what we've told is that will be an ill effect in the planning for NHS. So there should be an ill effect. That does not mean that it will translate that way.
Not exactly conversations with DFE, so I just wondered whether
we're building the budgets now. We're getting into that.
Okay, thank you. It's clear that the public finance context is ever tighter. We're getting a better understanding now of, as you've just highlighted, Sarah, what the headline budget settlement actually means for money flowing into the system. Sense of that. The issue for us is we can reference positively levels of cost improvement higher than we've achieved before. We can reference positively the external validation of what we're calling the grip and control measures. All of that, and we're further away from where we want to be.
May I inject some reasons to be cheerful? I feel like we need them. So I agree with all that. I suppose there are some reasons to be cheerful, but they're few and far between. But if you look at where we are, I think if we come back to sort of yesterday's joint committee discussions, we've got a really clear case for change being evidence that talks about moving away from individual organisational problems sitting within different organisations, and the solutions being a group of organisations effectively in shorthand trying to make clinicians' jobs easier to do, and therefore more effective, and therefore lower cost. And you can see still that despite all of this nightmarish doom and gloom around planning guidance is probably not going to come out until later, which is never usually a good sign. And all of that stuff that'll be in there, we have got to look at it from the perspective of, in the two organisations that we have responsibility for, we're on planning one of them, and we've got really good triangulated evidence of good controls and management in the other, even if we're not on the plan, and we can demonstrate why that is. A lot of organisations out there that are just going the wrong way and can't explain why. So that's, not a reason to be cheerful, but at least a starting point. But then when you look at the five, we've still got patients and clinicians just trying to find their way through the muddy water of 20 different digital systems, unable to refer to each other, adding cost to the system in duplicating effort. We've got multiplied methods of doing the same thing. Just looking yesterday at some of the work finance teams are doing. Why do we do planning in 5 different ways and make it so complex? And as we're starting to get into those conversations, just this week, Jenny and I were over in Alder Hay talking to Alder Hay about how we work better on neonates. And even they were saying, look, if you're aligning your policy, should we not align some of our policies with you? Because it makes no sense that we've got this different. So you can sort of see this slight shifting almost of a collective ownership of a set of problems that we don't see necessarily in individual organisation slices, but our patients see all the time, and our clinicians suffer sort of with every day. So we've got to remain hopeful, I think, that that's where we'll have to go to next, and there is stuff to go at there. I think if we were sitting here with a single Luft or Liverpool women's plan for the next 5 years, you'd be in real trouble. Whereas there is, I think, opportunity in the plans that we're developing as that broader group over this next few years. So we're going to really double down on that. That's where we're going to get this resolved. Thank you.
Is that discussion? Welcome, Diane. We've got one more item before we get on to the maternity perinatal issues, and it's the improvement plan.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep this brief. Much of the content last time, and many of the issues have come out from the site-based. Taking the two improvement plan updates in turn, the Luft improvement plan is unchanged with Amber. Clearly, one of our biggest challenges in the improvement plan that you can see from the risk and the reporting is the CIP, which we've well documented. It is worth referencing we've been having a big push through the CIP portfolio board around trying to shift on non-recurrent CIP. And as Pete said, if we look at it in total across all the sites, we think we've identified about 5 million that we can flip from non-recurrent to recurrent CIP, and that's all pay CIP, 3 million of which was at Aintree. That doesn't help the in-year position, but does remove risk for next year, because anything that is non-recurrent this year just gets added to the total next year. I think on CIP, I'd also point to good progress around some of our productivity programs. You can see in things like the CAP theatre utilisation that maintains continuous improvement, and also in the outpatient transformation project, we're seeing productivity gains there too. Should be on track to get close to our target at the end of the year of around 5 million savings. So good news there. Not meeting criteria to reside remains one of the biggest sort of thorny challenges within the programme. Pete and Nat have spoken to that. There's a big focus within the Integrated Health and Social Care programme on the reshaping of the transfer of care hub, which falls into 4 areas around transfer of care at the front door, around ward processes, around transferring how the MDT work happens, and also how the actual hub has capacity and the staff within it to function. So we're hoping those improvements will really help for next year. On the women's programme, I think it's a stable position. We're seeing continuing to see the improvements around the faster diagnosis standard. And the other counter metrics are slowly improving too. The up to board last time around the blood transfusion robot project and the need to run a procurement exercise there. Those timelines are getting locked in, but we expect that project to now conclude at the latest in Q2 next year, which would be a significant, it's a delay of 3 to 6 months. We're getting that capability on site of the significant achievement. The last thing, just to talk about there's now work going on around what we call our group transformation plan for next year, which is looking to shape the initiatives improvements both within the group. So that's things like the last programme and the work across the 5 trusts, and how we continue to develop our group operating model. But also next year we want to move to this point of each of the site hospital management boards and leadership teams should now be sort of really leading on those transformation priorities at site. So they will be identified and reported through the site improvement plans moving forwards. So that's kind of really all I was going to talk to, continuing to move the projects forward. In the improvement plans and things like the women's, we're starting to actually conclude projects, and we'll be going through a process of close down, and we'll report out on phase 2 generally at the end of the financial year.
Thank you.
Take questions.
Thank you, Tim. Good, James.
Excuse me, I'm at risk of being cheerful twice now in a row, but the women's improvement plan has been, I think, a real success this last year. There was lots of plans in place anyway the organisation needed to do, but if you think back to where that started from, to be, we're nearly at the point now of a medical emergency team conclusion that will be working across the 2 organisations in the early part of next year. So as we know around the risks around that site, having a med team on that site is critical. But particularly 10 ACPs recruited, a 24/7 consultant obstetrician rota now in place. I mean, a year ago, they were all things we were talking about as, do we think we'd even be able to get staff? Do we think people would do it? There's 7 more ONG clinical fellows coming in autumn. It's really, I think, succeeded in terms of the quality of safety. Whereas on the love side of things, there's been a lot of stuff that's been around sort of just trying to bring up. There's some really material differences in the delivery of the stuff in that plan, and the blood robot, as we know, will be a massive step forward in safety terms as well. So I think it's just a recognition of the efforts going into that, the results that are coming out of that. So I'm hoping the close down process of year 1 will be a real opportunity for us to celebrate some of those things, because having those things in place is materially different for the women's. And then I think we look forward to next year as the improvement programmes start to get into hospital focuses rather than an organisation-wide one. What else we can do between the organisations, particularly the Royal and the Women's, to shore up things like some of those anaesthetics charges and stuff. So just wanted to note that. I think it's these are really tangible safety benefits. Thank you. Any questions? David.
Yes, thank you. Could I just ask Tim if he'll just comment on the significant risks and issues table in the report? I believe there's a drafting error there. It gives the impression that we're not reviewing some of these risks since September and October time. And I understand from conversation with Tim that they're reviewed very frequently. And I think it'd be good for the record and the board just to have that.
Happy to, David. Yeah, all of these risks are reviewed regularly, either fortnightly, monthly, at the hospital management board, the 2 improvement plan boards, or the CIP improvement boards. There is a need, as you can see, to make sure the data is updated to reflect the very latest controls. I've reviewed all of these. All of the controls are still current and relevant, but we will go in and update the data system to.
Yeah, thank you. On the folks in the hospital with no medical criteria to be, I mean, clearly, as we go through as we've gone through each of the sites, this remains a vital sign for the health of our system. We heard last time that responsibility, however it had worked, sort of responsibility for sort of coordinated discharge had shifted to the council. And we hear from you today, Natalie, that they're maybe under, my words, not yours, maybe under resourced to do what's required in there. In terms of the overall improvement plan, where are we in the plan adding value to try with other partners in the system to continue to try and make the move? I know it's not moving in terms of financial improvement that we hoped for from reducing this number. But are we in terms of working differently with others in the system to try and move?
I'm sure that people want to come in as well. I mean, this is at the crux of it, isn't it? Because we have something in the plan where we absolutely need to influence partners to be able to get a shift in the performance we're looking for. I mean, if we went back sort of 4 or 5 months ago, and we really looked at this as a CIP improvement board, we identified brokerage and the transfer of care hub as the 2 projects that we really wanted to push on. Nat and her team have really helpfully then done a sort of diagnostic of where we think that TOC is against best practice, and have tried to sensitively land and position that with partners. And the project has been reshaped. And we are also, as an organisation, putting our transformation delivery resources into sort of replanning, to supporting the integrated health and social care programme to make sure that runs as effectively as it can do. But nevertheless, it does remain a challenge because we are looking for behavioural change within partners as well. But I'm sure Nat, you'll probably want to.
I would comment of where we're adding value, I think, is we are forming integrated discharge teams across 3 different sectors. We're not an integrated care organisation, and previously we haven't had an integrated discharge function. So the big change over the last couple of weeks, which I've referenced, is we now across every site, every day, have a daily NDT with the social workers present, with our ward staff, with our teams, and then from 3 perspectives. Just to be clear, when I say they're under resourced, they have picked up all that workload, they've transferred it, and now they are wanting to put in better ways of working with the care homes and with us as a hostel. But obviously that's taking quite a bit of initial resource to go through all the patients that are on that list, because there's nearly 180 patients. So it's just the initial period of transition that I think the council are trying to get on top of. But definitely from a working relationships, and not I think previously there's been good relationships at a senior level, but what we're getting to now is our matrons, our ward managers, with social workers, with community. And I don't think previously, I know when I started this organisation, I don't think that was there. So I think it's that sort of middle tier management and clinical teams coming together now and starting to work on integrated plans. I think we'll get a benefit.
Yeah, no, so I believe all that. Just to briefly add, when we did the NHS England call last Friday, they picked up on that too. And what are we doing as a system? And that's the challenge around the P1s in particular with the criteria to reside, because I think that's the bit who could really help us in this sort of this winter period to get those numbers down. So we're working on and the system partners have been asked to produce a trajectory of reducing those P1 numbers.
P1s.
P1. I just been earlier on as pathway 1 patients. So patients who are waiting for some social care to keep themselves at home as opposed to going into a residential. And that's usually should be much quicker to get someone home in their own home. And Jason obviously assures us that there is the capacity to do that, like getting patients to that point quickly.
On that point, P1 patient, realistically, going home just needs a little bit of something to be able to go home. We should be aiming for what, around 24 hours?
24 hours, yeah.
What's our current in Liverpool?
5 to 6 days. So maybe a bit, 5 to 6 days.
Yeah, 7.
Okay. I mean, what would be my question was whether the improvement scientists that we have in the transformation unit are focusing their efforts on are we connected with the day-to-day operational priorities that we've got?
In terms of the resourcing around the programme?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole team of people.
We absolutely are. It's hard to do it within your organisation. It's even harder when you're going across organisational boundaries. The people from our transformation delivery unit are connected with colleagues from the ICB and the council that are involved with the programme board. So we are reaching out, but it's harder when you get.
Okay, understood. Any other points on the improvement? Yes, Mike.
Can I just ask a criteria to resign question? So at the moment, it's roughly 400 no criteria to resign patients, but the number of total days is coming down.
Yeah.
So what does that say? Is that if the days weren't coming down, it'd be 500 or something? So that this is a avoidance of future blockage, or what is the benefit of the days coming down, and is that being crystallised?
There's a bed days of sort of bed days gain, basically. Yeah. So if the days weren't coming down, then we would have an even more problem at the front door, effectively. So what it is, we're freeing up the beds quicker. But it's back to that point. There's a good illustration of same number of people stuck. If you look at the priority 1 patients who just need that hospital care, it was 7 days. It's now 5 days, but it should be 1 day. And if that continues to move, like we said before, I mean, I wouldn't say I would ever be happy with 4 people being somewhere they shouldn't be, but you'd probably take it if they were only there for 24 hours. Well, 5 days means massive impact.
Okay, good. Thank you, Tim. Right, well, welcome again to Diane, colleague David. Coming to you first on the clinical negligence scheme for trust maternity incentive scheme update. Last time, I think it's a year-end report now. Before we begin the substantial item, I want to introduce the colleagues who've come in to observe our business on this.
Absolutely. So they're observing today, but they've been an integral part of the development and the completion of this work over many years, but certainly in this scheme year. We simply wouldn't be where we are without their not only scrutiny, challenge, critique, but their support and their expertise. So it is part of an important part of the scheme, as delegated by the ICB, that the colleagues that are in the room here today witness the oversight from the board. But of course, this isn't just a once a year moment. To make that absolutely clear that we must have almost daily conversations with our colleagues, and that this has been a regular agenda item at both the Quality Committee and the board for the past 12 months, with regular points of scrutiny into the individual safety actions. So we've got Catherine McLaren, who's the Programme Director and SRO for the LMNS. We've got Claire Fitzpatrick, who's the Director of Midwifery for the LMNS, and we've got Dorinda Roberts, who is also the Medical Director, but also a consultant obstetrician at Liverpool Women's. So I think I've done you all right there, haven't I? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. When we've concluded the item, I'll ask you, any of the three of you, if there's anything that you wish to add or say to the board. Don't feel under pressure to say anything in particular, but I'll give you the opportunity. David.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll say very little apart from I again pass my thanks on to Di and colleagues at Liverpool Women's Hospital for the work that they do with this and the scrutiny that they put into their everyday work to ensure the quality and safety of care for women at that hospital. I'll pass over to Di because Di starts paper and she's the lead for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. I'll take the paper as read. The format is very similar to the format you've seen before. Importantly, for this paper, the board are asked to receive the contents and to be assured around the compliance with the Year 6 scheme and with all of the 10 safety standards within it. There are a number of appendices, which are papers that come before the board today for that assurance and approval. And of course, the perinatal dashboard is included as part of that. So the introduction sets out very clearly the purpose of the scheme and provides a good summary of the scheme in terms of safety standards and purpose over many years. Table 1 within the paper, which is a very detailed table, sets out the narrative and progress against each of the standards and has enabled us to confirm compliance with all of the standards. It's important to note that there have been multiple checkpoints throughout the year, both internally and externally, where there are deep dives done and points of clarification and assurance from our external colleagues sat within the board today. One area to note and to update that this paper was presented at the Hospital Management Board at Liverpool Women's on Monday. Clearly, we were working on some of the timings of these, but there is an update around safety action 8, which is around medical staff in relation to fetal surveillance training, which highlighted in the paper as being slightly below. As of the 11th of December, compliance rate of 95% has been achieved. HMB at Liverpool Women's will receive written confirmation of that in January 2025, and the plan is that we would make note of that through the Managing Director's report in here in January 2025. So I wasn't going to talk in detail to anything else, but happy to take any questions throughout any of the detail within it.
Thank you for the update on standard aid. Jenny, is there anything you want to add?
No, just to echo Di's point, we do see this every month through the various committees. We've got to the stage in the year where we're at a point to recommend sign off. Can't underestimate the amount of work that goes into achieving these standards year on year, year 6 and awaiting year 7 eagerly. But just thanks to all the team for all the hard work that goes in, because it is an incredible amount of work and effort to get to this point.
Thank you. And colleagues who've joined us, anything you wish to say before I open up for board question and discussion, please?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Chair. It's just a point of process, and that is that the scheme for year 5 and 6 also requires the sign off of the ICB chief executive. So actually, once it's been assured here and signed off, it will then need to be signed by your chief executive and then onto Graham Irwin at the ICB sign on before submission. So that's kind of our role really in terms of that assurance. So assuring that also the board has provided that oversight, scrutiny and assurance. And I know it's a different, you've kind of moved into a different model this year, but it's really important for future schemes as well in terms of that assurance role of this board. So that was just missing from the paper actually, but that sign off will be required in February period and we'll help with the process for that.
Thank you. Very clear. Very much. Okay, Jackie, to you first.
Just really to reiterate that the work that the LMS do in assuring us of the work that we're doing and all the work that the team are doing. And it's, I know it comes to the board monthly, but this is a constantly day in, day out review of where we're going and making sure that we hit for the benefit of our ladies, the good standards of practice. So I think I just want to recognise that this is it is not by accident. It is by really well managed processes led by Diane. So I just want to capture that, please.
Thank you. Any other points, question? We can tend to approve. Yeah. Yes. Excellent. Thank you. From Diane, colleagues. Are we moving straight on?
Please.
Take it to the perinatal qualities.
I'll refer to my colleague, Diane.
Thank you. Again, the perinatal dashboard is incredibly being repaid, but again, it's part of not only the scheme, good governance and good practice to be taking that fresh look at our outcomes on a monthly basis. You will see again, it's a very well rehearsed document that you see before you with a suite of indicators that are narrated by exception. You will see last month, I think Sarah mentioned the difference between the IPR. I don't know if that's been addressed further on in the meeting, apologies if it has, but the difference in stillbirth data, and obviously that's our adjusted stillbirth data that's within the perinatal dashboard. I'm pleased to be able to see and report the further reduction in induction of labour delays. Still some work to do in there, but it's demonstrating really that the actions that we put in place are resulting in that improvement. Out of those women who did experience a delay in the last month, a review of their care has been undertaken and no harm has occurred as a result of any delay. That doesn't mean that we accept those delays. It's still in an acceptable position and the target of those is absolutely zero. And just to say, in terms of the web holding file, again, daily oversight, there was a live dashboard so that they were able to manage and quantify any risk that sits within our incident reporting. And of course, reference to the board safety champions, of which one of our non-exec colleagues is part of that, and the visit to this site earlier in the month. Also, just wanted to point out within the dashboard the position of 0 midwifery vacancies, and that continues to be an excellent position as we go into 2025. My proposal, if colleagues are happy, is that although this is a key part of maternity assurance, it probably needs to sit as a fundamental part of the board's assurance and probably needs to sit within the integrated performance report and get that scrutiny as well through there going forward.
Yeah. So, well, thank you. Again, Jenny.
I think what Di's just highlighted kind of correlates with the conversation we had earlier on around the hospital update, and again, significant work goes in with the team. So thank you for that.
David.
Thank you. This is a question, just a point, and really, Phil has only to say it. we recognise within the paper the position with midwives, and we know that's being managed and scrutinised on an almost daily, weekly basis within the hospital. So I feel confident that that's happening, but I just thought I would call that out.
Thank you. Helpful. Jackie, please.
Yeah, so specifically, I just want to bring up issues of my board safety champion walk around, which actually was on the Aintree site about 3 weeks ago. So one of the big standouts for me was about the quality of signage, because actually when you ask colleagues in the organisation, when you're walking down the corridor, can you tell me where it is? They couldn't, and it just talks about women's health, which is fine, but the logo next to that may help do that. And I did ask patients, and they did say it was a struggle to find the first time. But the biggest thing that I wasn't aware of and picked up, so it set me off on a journey of understanding, is about the out of area patients and the digital records. So I was told that there's over 700 patients that were on that journey, but we don't see all those interactions with all other parts of the system. So the patient should come in as an emergency. It relies on the patient telling us their story and journey as well. So I'm just want to capture here that the digital integration is really important. And I know the EPR will help with all that, but I just, as Catherine is here today, just to flag it up and see how high it is up your agenda, if I may pass the question that way.
So in terms of, thanks Jackie, in terms of digital and the development of the EPR across Cheshire and 35, it's fair to say there was a slight delay, I think, from the ICB in terms of the priority for the services. That has now been reconfirmed again by John Llewellyn and Adam Drury in the team, and we've got a kind of a workshop across the system in February with the CIOs and also the digital midwives to look at that. So it is on our risk register, and it has been flagged, and it has been flagged for some time. And I think yesterday as well we had a serious incident panel, and there was an incident which was specifically in relation to out of area women, and it was something that we have asked the trust to look at in terms of that process and pathway for those women as well to bring back to us for help and support.
Thank you. I was aware of that case, so that's really helpful. Thank you.
It was just a related issue on the Jackie's visit to women's at Aintree site, and I think just by chance about 4 of us have all visited in a short space of time, completely unrelated, but they probably wonder why we keep coming around. But I think myself, Jenny and Di had a good discussion the other day about the future of that. There is the service here, I think, is not in a great location. If you look at the separation of the sort of antenatal and gynae waiting areas and stuff, that's now combined. That's not great. So you'd be unsurprised here. I think one of the big things on the improvement plans next year, one of the benefits of having hospital-based improvement plans that are connected in that group model is we need a better solution here at Aintree for that service. And I know Pete's aware of that. In fact, Pete's visited as well. There needs to be a better solution, because we could be doing more stuff here for that population that sits just north of the city. And I think it's just crying out for a revised plan, really. So I think we've had a good initial discussion about it, so you can probably expect to see some of that in next year's plan.
Thank you. Hopeful, David.
Does Jackie want to come back on that?
Just come back in on that, if that's okay. Thank you, David. It was just really to say that the staff were really, really positive about, even though they've been moved around a lot and accepted changes, they were really positive as well about what they were doing for the ladies and that. So I think that's just really important to note, because it is a difficult situation, isn't it, when you never know where you're going to be over a number of months and that. So I just want to capture that as well if we can.
On the report, we show that term admissions to NICU fall outside the guidelines for 3 of the 12 months shown. Should we be concerned about that? Is that something that control should be addressing?
Yeah, it's there so that we can observe it. Absolutely, we should be concerned. We get those natural variations, fluctuations in terms of deliveries in kind of the complexity of both women and baby that we treat and see. That's why it's monitored. There is a improvement plan led by a consultant neonatologist overseeing that piece of work. I think that's reported previously to a quality committee in very great detail. So it is something that we're really focused on understanding the reasons why. Sometimes those admissions are very short term. They're related to the baby getting a bit cold post-delivery. Nevertheless, they're still important, and that's why we track and monitor and have an improvement plan associated.
Thanks, Chair.
I would say, as Di referenced before, I think starting to bring this alongside the IPR, trying to use some of that statistical process control analysis will help us as well, because as Di said, it gets really strong scrutiny, but it also refers to trends where we need sort of greater depth of information around whether it is a statistical trend or not. So as we start to align that coming into April, I think that will help all of us to be able to see that. But like the conversation we had around some of the stillbirth stuff and how that's looked at in terms of control limits, it will just give us greater assurance again, I think. But I'm not concerned by the numbers we've seen, because they are discussed in depth and analysed in depth at other limits.
If I may, just to add to that, for context, in the quality committee, what we'd have looked at is the cause, as you say. So some of the variances are completely out of our control, but babies get the care. So that's the detail that will still be talked about, but it's where there's a causality that could be.
Thank you, Sarah. Good point. All good. Thank you again. The current position and taken it, sure. Our last substantive item today is the Women's Hospital Charitable Funds accounts. We'll remember at our last meeting we received the equivalent accounts from the Love of Charity.
Thank you, Chair. So the accounts that are before you today have been approved by the Charitable Funds Committee in October 24. They have been subject to an independent examination, which is not the same as a full audit, but is perfectly adequate for the size of our charity and the complexity of it. That independent audit has proved positive, so independent examination has proved positive. There's no issues for us to be concerned about, and their conclusion is within the annual report and accounts. So what the board are asked to do today is to approve the charity's annual report and accounts, and also the letter of representation for approval, which will be signed by the Chief Finance Officer of the board.
Thank you. Any questions? It's a very photograph heavy document. Real insight into the operation of it. We've got Tracy first.
Yes, it's tremendous work. It's really good to see what Liverpool Women's Charity have been up to through the year. I suppose the thing I would just say is that this didn't come last month. It should really come in the same timetable, I think, as the left chapel. It's far better to do that. And then we would have had Zia here, who actually did chair the Charitable Funds Committee as well. So it's a shame that we've slipped a month. Hopefully next year we can actually sort of align that. That would be better, really.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good report.
Isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, but it's best report I've read to a set of trust account, fundraising account. I think it's brilliant. I think it actually captures the essence of what's going on. It captures the fact it's about people, and it's not just a series of kind of statutory elements. And it's a brilliant report.
Any other?
Just come back on that, and that's been a real effort by the fundraising team and the people who prepare the accounts over the last few years, because these are, whilst they are a statutory document that we need to upload at the end of January to the Charities Commission, people also look at them as well, and I think it is a really good vehicle for people to get to know and understand charity and what we're all about. So that's been a really focused piece of work by the team, so I'll feed that back to them.
Thank you. Okay, intent to receive. Thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion of our business. Anything that you want to cover, James?
No, nothing, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Nothing final that's emerged from the discussion that would impact changes to the risk register. No, we're all covered. Okay, we're done on this meeting. All very much indeed. We resume again in minutes time.